Today we're going to be going over our group of five college football playoff predictions. So basically, we're going to be ranking the top 10 teams out of the group of five that we think have the best chance of grabbing that automatic bid into the CFP. And coming in at number 10 is going to be the Liberty Flames. Now, the path for Liberty going to be pretty tough because they do not play a single Power 4 team this season. Their best game, arguably, is a home matchup with James Madison. Really, there's nothing to impress the committee here. I think that, kind of like it says right there, they got to blow out everybody they play, and every other group of five champ has to have two losses. And I still think that the ceiling for Liberty, if they go 13 and 0, is probably being ranked somewhere around 20 to 25.
Yeah, this is purely just because the Conference USA is going to have a conference champ that will have some slight chance, but Jonah already mentioned with such a weak schedule with no Power Four team, the best name brand team on here that they play is Bowling Green on the road, and I think Bowling Green is going to take a big step backwards this year with the departure of Harold Cannon Jr., who was like their best player. It's really just not in the cards for any team in Conference USA to come out and be the G5 representative in the college football playoffs. But Liberty will most likely be the conference champ, though. But once again, very little chance they actually make it to the 12-team playoff.
Coming in at number 9, going to be Southern Miss. This is the team that got most of the transfers from Marshall last year, and that was a very solid Marshall team. Also, obviously, got their head coach. I do think Southern Miss has a little bit better chance because they have a Power 4 team on the schedule, even though it's Mississippi State, who's arguably one of the worst teams in the conference. So they're going to have to beat them and hope that SEC bias is a thing with the committee. And as far as the conference games, nobody else really noteworthy on this schedule. No other Power Four teams. You got to blow everybody else out if they want to impress the committee and earn a bid.
And even though they do play an SEC team, it is a home game, so it takes away from the win if they were to beat Mississippi State because they had the home field advantage. Now, if they were able to beat them on the road, then that might be a little bit of a different story, but really doesn't move the needle too much more. It's kind of the same story as Liberty. They just need to blow out every single team that they play against and hope that that win against Mississippi State pans out. Hope maybe in some parallel dimension that Mississippi State ends up being one of the best teams in college football, but I severely doubt that that's actually going to happen. So even though that this team will be pretty solid and competitive and has a shot to win the Sun Belt, they will not have a good chance of making that 12-team playoff either.
Just ahead of Southern Miss, going to be a fellow Sun Belt team. This one, James Madison. And I think that JMU has a significantly better chance than Southern Miss. Unlike Southern Miss, they have their Power 4 game on the road. So going to Louisville and getting a win would be huge for this JMU team. And then also got Washington State on the schedule. Not technically a Power 4 team anymore because the Pac-12 doesn't exist as of right now, but they still have some of that lingering respect from being in that conference. So I do think that that would be another key win. So JMU has the potential to get a few more bigger wins. I still think they probably have a ranking cap, even if they're 13 and 0, of somewhere between, I would say 15 to 20 personally, with having, Louisville having a really solid season despite a JMU loss. That would help them out quite a bit. But for them to be the group of five representative, I still think they're going to have to be 13 and 0. A 12 and 1 Boise State, in my opinion, because they did it last year, gets in over a 13 and 0 James Madison team that beat Louisville and Washington State.
And like we already mentioned with Liberty, the Dukes do play the Flames this season, which does help their resume just a little bit if Liberty were to be the Conference USA champs and only have that one loss to James Madison. But like Jonas already mentioned, it's a uphill battle for them to even beat Louisville on the road. And if they somehow do that and beat Washington State, I don't know if that is going to be able to get them above Boise State in the rankings or any of these other teams that we have coming up in this ideal season. The team is going to be fairly talented, and we saw them beat a Power Four team last year on the road when they beat North Carolina at Chapel Hill. but I don't think James Madison has what it takes to be that group of five representative in the playoffs this year. They could make it interesting, but not in the cards this season.
Coming in at number 7, going to be the Ohio Bobcats out of the MAC. And I think that they have a very solid opportunity with three Power Four teams on the schedule. Obviously, Rutgers and West Virginia are a lot more winnable games than the road trip to Columbus. If they somehow do beat Ohio State and Columbus, Ohio becomes the immediate favorites to be the Group of Five representative in the playoffs. But even if they lose to the Buckeyes, if you can make that close, beat two Power Four teams in Rutgers and West Virginia, now you have a legitimate case because, as we saw last year with Boise State, they lost a close game to Oregon and they gained a lot of respect from that. Now, Ohio doesn't have Ashton Jeanty, but Boise State doesn't either anymore. So I think that if they can keep it close with the Buckeyes and get those two Power Four wins, going 12-1 is going to give them a very solid opportunity to at least be in consideration for that Group of Five playoff bid.
Especially considering that the Rutgers game and the Ohio State game are both road trips. So if they can win on the road against the Scarlet Knights and keep it close at the shoe or somehow win, then it is looking a lot better for the Bobcats here. And their conference schedule is not too shabby either. They play Miami, Ohio, who were the runner-ups in the MAC last season behind Ohio, who ended up winning the conference. And their final game of the season is against Buffalo on the road. And a lot of people are really high on this Buffalo team as well, as they have a very solid roster. I doubt Buffalo would be a ranked team at any point in this season, but still will have a fairly solid record, and that would help the Bobcats' resume. But it really comes down to they have to win those first two games, and they have to at least be in it against Ohio. Like, it can't be they're in it for only a half and then get blown out. They have to be in the game from start to finish or pull off an upset win. But because that seems very unlikely, we really can't justify putting them any higher in the standings.
And I think that that point you make about Ohio is really solid because Memphis doesn't have as difficult of a non-conference schedule as the Bobcats, but it's really unlikely that Ohio does win all three of those games. So that's something that we did take into consideration. And this Memphis team, I think, is going to be pretty solid. They don't have as tough of a schedule, like I was saying. Their main big game going to be Arkansas at home. You got to beat your SEC team. And if they do that, they'll become one of the favorites for this spot. But a tough close to the season. You got to beat both Tulane and Navy, and then likely one of those two again in the American Championship. But I think an undefeated Memphis would definitely be in the playoffs. I just don't see a way they could be left out because that is a strong enough resume, in my opinion, to be the Group of Five resume. 12-1 losing to Arkansas has an argument, but you've now opened the door for other teams such as a potential 12-1 Boise State or a 12-1 UNLV who would have a, I think, better argument to get in over Memphis. So undefeated is really the best case scenario for the Tigers this year.
And if they don't go undefeated, they have to hope that Tulane and Navy both end up as top 25 teams by the time that they play them, because then you add those top 25 wins if they were to get those wins. Both of them are at home, though, so not going to look as good on the resume, but if you ever have a top 25 win, it instantly is going to boost your spot. And like Jonah already mentioned, Arkansas is definitely a more winnable game. That is also a home game for the Tigers, so definitely could be a bit of a trap game for the Razorbacks. And if they were able to win that one and go undefeated, then I do think it's very possible to see them in the playoffs, considering that the American is probably the second conference that they would choose from for their group of five representative in the playoffs behind the Mountain West, because we saw Boise State in the playoffs last year. So it's really going to come down to, I think, these two conferences and who ends up being the conference champ. Memphis has a little bit tougher of a stretch with this team that they have, but definitely not out of the picture.
Next up is Toledo. This is a team that got a couple Power Four wins last season. You got a win over Mississippi State on the road, and they also beat Pittsburgh in their bowl game. If they can keep that up this year, win a road game against a solid Kentucky team who brought in Zach Calzada in the transfer portal, hoping the SEC bias is real, could definitely help out Toledo. Western Kentucky, I think, is another solid matchup. They typically get a little bit of name brand recognition, so that might help them out a tad. And then a road trip to Washington State, kind of like that we talked about earlier. They still have a little bit of that lingering Power Four respect from being in the Pac-12. So I think Toledo's still going to need to blow out a lot of their MAC opponents, but they have a few games on there that can help build this resume and have a legitimate playoff case. If they're undefeated, I think that they have a great case to be in. But kind of like Connor was just mentioning, the Mountain West and the American both have better conference prestige. So I think a 12-1 team out of one of those conferences versus a 13-0 Toledo would definitely still be a debate.
It definitely comes down to how Toledo looks in that first game against Kentucky, though. A win over an SEC team instantly boosts your chances, but depending on how convincing of a win it is, will determine how much prestige they associate with that win. And Kentucky, even though they did make some improvements, was still the second worst team in the SEC last year, but still will look great on this Toledo resume. The only thing that might hurt them, though, is their conference schedule. It is very winnable and they can go undefeated in the conference. And that's because they don't play Ohio or Buffalo, who are two of the other favorites to win the conference. They do play Miami, Ohio, who was the runner up last season, but they've lost quite a bit of production from last year. I don't expect Toledo to really struggle in the conference too much this season. It really comes down to those key games against Kentucky and Washington State on the road and a nice win over Western Kentucky. So definitely a step up from a team like Ohio, who has a little bit more difficult of a schedule, but still not a very clear path to the playoffs here.
Now, coming in at number four, really starting to get into those teams that I think have a legitimate shot at being the G5 representative, UNLV. Now, you know what they say. If you want to be the champs, you have to beat the champs. If you want to be the group of five representative, you have to beat the group of five representative. And UNLV is the only team on this list that has the opportunity to beat Boise State. If they can do it, I think that's going to carry a lot of weight with the committee, especially if they did it twice. Because Boise State was the first team to get that group of five bid, they are going to hold a certain prestige over teams that have not done that yet. I think beating UCLA with Nico Iamaleava transferring there, especially early in the season, it's going to carry a little bit more weight than if UCLA has a worse record later on. So these are things that very much can help UNLV. And like it says right there at the bottom, if UNLV does go 13-0, which we don't think is very likely, but if they do, they are going to be without a doubt the group of five representative this season.
Yep, Jonah already mentioned it. Win the conference, and you're most likely in. It would only come down to if they were to drop that UCLA game and the Boise State game. If they drop those two games and still manage to win the conference, I think then the committee becomes a little bit skeptical and will likely lean towards another conference champ that has a little bit better of a record. A one-loss conference champ will be better than a two-loss conference champ, unless for whatever reason they think that win over Boise State in the conference championship game after losing to them previously carries more weight. But UNLV has a pretty clear path. It just comes down to, can this team made up of so many transfers actually fulfill that path and get to that college football playoff spot? It's a little bit of an uphill battle considering that they lost both times last year to Boise State. But with no Ashton Jeanty, who knows what's in store for these two teams?
Next up is going to be Tulane. And when you look at their schedule, they have just more opportunities than UNLV does. You got a home matchup with Northwestern, who's not very good, but at least you have a Big Ten team on the schedule. A home matchup with Duke, where they're playing their former starting quarterback in Darian Mensah. Got paid a lot of money to transfer to Duke, and this is a very solid Duke team this year. They've been great the last 2 years. I think that beating Duke would carry a lot of weight. And then if they were somehow to win at Ole Miss, that is a huge opportunity for this Tulane team. I think that, I mean, a 13-0 Tulane team is absolutely a lock. They had a solid chance at that point at being ranked in the top 10. A one-loss Tulane, with the loss being to Ole Miss, still has wins over Duke and Northwestern, as well as teams like Army, Memphis, maybe Navy in the conference championship. I think that a one-loss Tulane team would still have a very good argument, especially going against a one-loss Boise State. Now you're looking at a little bit tougher situation, which is why they're ranked here at number three. But a one-loss Tulane has a very good chance to be the G5 representative too.
I would argue if all group of five conference champs were to finish with only one loss in the regular season, Tulane would probably have the best chance of making it because of the non-conference opponents that they have. Jonah already mentioned Northwestern is not that good, but it is still a Big Ten team. It's no easy feat to actually beat a Big Ten team. And we are very high on Duke this year. If they manage to beat Darien Mensah in this revenge game, that's going to look very good because I think Duke has some top 25 potential. I don't know if they climb out of the 20 to 25 rankings, but still will be a fairly decent team. And Ole Miss has started out as a ranked team. If they manage to keep that rank into the game against Tulane and Tulane were to pull off an upset or lose that game but keep it competitive, then you're looking at a really solid Tulane team whose only loss is to a top 25 team on the road in close fashion. And Jonah already mentioned Army was the conference champ last year. A win over them is going to look good. Memphis has a chance to win the conference, and that's a road game for the Green Wave. That's going to be a huge win if they get that too. If they beat Navy, who we think is also going to be very, very good, then that is a very solid resume. I don't think the committee could deny Tulane that playoff spot if they were the same record as someone like Boise State.
I think it is a little bit similar to Ohio, though, because the odds of Tulane actually making it through this tough schedule, especially for a group of five team with just one loss, is very low. Next up, another American team. As we were just talking about with Tulane, Navy is going to be a very solid team, and they don't have as tough of a schedule, but that means that they're likely going to have a better record, which is why they're able to be ranked ahead. Their toughest game, obviously, going to be the road trip to Notre Dame. If they can win that game, beating a team that was in the national championship last year gives Navy a excellent chance to really impress the committee and also get some of that name brand recognition boosting their resume. I think that they have a chance as a two-loss conference champion, especially if one of those losses is Notre Dame. If you lose to somebody like Memphis, beat him in the rematch, there's still an opportunity, however slim it may be. And I think another thing that is very key is if Blake Horvath is a Heisman finalist, you know ESPN loves their ratings. That will help Navy out if they can get him into the Heisman conversation. I think that that gives them a little bit of a boost to getting him into the playoffs, kind of similar to what we saw with Ashton Jeanty and Boise State. People want to watch the best players play in the playoffs. And obviously, Boise State deserved it last year. If Navy can get through the season with just one loss and finish as the American champs, I think they have a great opportunity to get in. It's actually very similar to Boise State last year. Boise State's one loss being to Oregon, Navy's would be to Notre Dame. It really does fall into basically the same category.
And the biggest struggle for Navy will be consistently beating these teams because of their style of offense. Yes, they have so much returning production, especially with Blake Horvath returning as a starting quarterback who basically did everything last year. There's a reason why we think he has a chance to be a Heisman finalist. But their style of play is very easy to counter if you do the work. And it's going to be pretty difficult for them to only have one loss on the season, with that one loss being to Notre Dame. We saw them get blown out by the Fighting Irish last year. But if they can improve just a little bit, like Jonah already mentioned, the rest of the schedule is pretty easy. And the tough games are really at the end of the season with South Florida, Memphis, and then the conference championship before you play Army. If they manage to win out in the conference in regular season play, then win the conference championship game against a team that will also very likely be in a similar situation to Navy. Basically, the winner of the American in this situation between Navy and either Tulane or Memphis would be competing directly with Boise State for that group of five representation. And the American is going to have two really solid teams that are on the cusp of being top 25 teams. And if Navy gets the win and was able to keep it close with Notre Dame and finish the year off with only that one loss, then it's very possible to see them in it. It just comes down to how dominant they are in the rest of their schedule and how close that Notre Dame can be. But they aren't number one for a reason because the number one team, to no one's surprise, is Boise State.
And there's good reason for that. They're the only team in the 12-team playoff era to be the group of five representative. To be fair, there's only been one opportunity, but it was Boise State. And the biggest thing for them is just repeating the offensive success, but without Ashton Jeanty. I think they're going to be just fine. You return Maddox Madsen, which is one of the huge keys for doing that. If they can keep it close with Notre Dame, which I really think they can, based on the fact that they were able to keep it close with Oregon last year, they are automatically the favorites. If you somehow beat Notre Dame, you might as well just give it to them at that point. And I think the UNLV game is going to be tough. If they do lose that, obviously you have to beat them in the conference championship to win the conference, but it also does help to avenge that loss. A 12-1 Boise State with a close loss to Notre Dame is going to be your group of five representative. And if they go 11-2, a little bit less likely, especially if we see somebody from the American hitting 12-1. If you see Toledo at 13-0 in the MAC, now you have a really intriguing conversation between those three teams. However, I think most likely case scenario, a 12-1 Boise State. You got the familiarity bias because they did it before. That's why they're going to end up being our favorites to make the college football playoffs this season.
They're the team to beat for a reason. That familiarity is really the big thing that's going for Boise State. They might not have as difficult of a schedule compared to some of our other possible representatives, like Tulane, for example. But given the fact that they were so dominant last year, and besides Ashton Jeanty leaving, have everyone else essentially returning, they're going to be just as dominant as they were last year as they are this year. It really just comes down to getting the job done, taking care of business. Don't lose any games that you shouldn't, and keep it close with Notre Dame like you did with Oregon last year. If they're able to do that, then I wouldn't be surprised if Boise State in year two of the 12-team playoffs is also in year two as the group of five representative. It's going to be close and it'll be interesting. We'll see how the season shakes out. But for right now, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of our videos, and we will see you in the next one.